It's 4:30 in the morning. The horn sounds across the plantation. Within 60 seconds, every enslaved person must be standing outside their cabin. There are no exceptions, no sick days, no sleeping in. This was the reality for approximately 1.8 million enslaved people working on cotton plantations across the American South in 1850. They produced nearly 2.3 billion pounds of cotton that year. Cotton that made up 60% of all American exports. Cotton that built the nation's economy. But behind those numbers were real people. Living, breathing human beings who experienced every brutal minute of the labor that made that production possible. Today, we're going to follow one complete day in the life of an adult cotton picker on a Mississippi plantation in 1850. Every detail you're about to hear is documented in first-hand accounts from formerly enslaved people, plantation records, and historical research. This is what a day actually looked like. From the moment that horn sounded at 4:30 a.m. until workers collapsed 16 hours later. No dramatization, no speculation. Just the documented facts of what cotton picking really was. This is a day in the life of a cotton picker in 1850, from sunrise to sunset. Historical records show that most cotton plantations used a horn or bell to wake enslaved workers between 4 o'clock and 5 a.m. On larger plantations, the signal could be heard up to 2 miles away. Workers were expected to be outside and ready within minutes. Plantation ledgers and overseer journals document that tardiness was punished with whipping, food reduction, or increased work quotas. Living conditions in slave quarters were documented extensively by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, when they interviewed over 2,000 formerly enslaved people. These testimonies describe cabins measuring roughly 12 by 12 feet, housing anywhere from 6 to 12 people. The cabins were constructed from rough-hewn logs with significant gaps in the walls. Former slaves consistently described cold air coming through in winter and oppressive heat in summer. Floors were typically dirt. Windows, if they existed, had no glass. Furniture was minimal or non-existent. Archaeological excavations of slave quarters confirm these accounts. Researchers have found evidence of dirt floors, crude fireplaces, and sleeping areas that would have required people to sleep side by side on the ground. Clothing allocations were documented in plantation records. Adult field workers typically received 2 sets of clothes per year. One for summer, made from Osnaburg cloth, a rough, cheap fabric that contemporary accounts describe as extremely uncomfortable against skin. One for winter, made from slightly heavier material. Shoes were rarely provided except during the coldest winter months. Medical journals from the period document the severe foot damage enslaved workers experienced, including permanent callousing, infections, and deformities from years of barefoot labor. As workers assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, overseers conducted a count to ensure everyone was present. Plantation records show this was standard practice. The overseer, typically a white man hired by the plantation owner, was responsible for managing the labor force and ensuring production quotas were met. Historical accounts describe overseers carrying whips as standard equipment. The whip wasn't just a tool for punishment. Its presence served as a constant psychological reminder of the violence that could be inflicted at any moment. Workers would then walk to the fields, sometimes as far as a mile from the quarters. This walk occurred before any food was consumed. Breakfast, if it occurred at all, happened later in the morning or was skipped entirely during peak harvest season. Cotton plants at harvest time stood approximately 3 to 4 feet tall. Each plant produced multiple bolls, the seed pods containing the cotton fiber. When ripe, these bolls would burst open, revealing the white cotton inside. Agricultural studies from the period document that cotton bolls had sharp, dried edges that would cut human skin with repeated contact. Medical journals from plantation doctors describe lacerations on the hands and fingers as universal among cotton pickers. Each picker was issued a cotton sack. Historical records indicate these sacks were made from burlap or similar rough material and typically weighed 5 to 7 pounds when empty. Adult field workers were assigned daily quotas ranging from 150 to 200 pounds of picked cotton, depending on the plantation and the worker's experience. Plantation punishment records, which many owners kept in meticulous detail, document that failure to meet quota resulted in whipping. The number of lashes varied but was typically between 5 and 20, depending on how far short the worker fell from their target. The physical mechanics of cotton picking required workers to bend over thousands of times per day. Ergonomic studies conducted in the 20th century on similar repetitive bending motions document severe strain on the lower back, shoulders, and neck. Medical examinations of formerly enslaved people in the years after emancipation frequently noted chronic back problems, spinal deformities, and limited range of motion consistent with years of this type of labor. As the cotton sack filled, its weight increased dramatically. By the time a worker had picked 100 pounds, they were dragging an additional 100 pounds behind them while continuing to bend, pick, and move forward. Physics calculations show this would increase the physical strain exponentially. Temperature records from Mississippi in August and September consistently showed daytime highs between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Combined with humidity levels often exceeding 70%, the heat index would regularly reach dangerous levels. Modern occupational health standards would classify this work environment as posing extreme risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Workers in 1850 had no such protections. Water breaks were at the discretion of the overseer. Shade was non-existent in open cotton fields. Overseers patrolled the rows on horseback throughout the day. Their job was to maintain work pace and identify anyone falling behind. Plantation journals document this surveillance system as standard practice across the Cotton South. Historical accounts from formerly enslaved people consistently describe the psychological impact of this constant monitoring. The knowledge that you were being watched, that any slowdown could result in violence, created a state of perpetual anxiety that compounded the physical exhaustion. By mid-morning, workers would have been picking for 4 to 5 hours straight. Historical records indicate that some plantations allowed a brief breakfast break around 8 or 9 a.m., while others provided no morning break at all, requiring workers to continue until the midday dinner break. The pace had to be maintained regardless of injury, illness, or exhaustion. Plantation profit margins depended on maximizing output. Enslaved people weren't workers who could quit or negotiate. They were property, and property was expected to produce. The midday meal, called dinner in plantation terminology, typically occurred between noon and 1 p.m. Duration varied by plantation, but rarely exceeded 30 to 40 minutes. Food was brought to the fields rather than workers returning to quarters. This saved time and kept workers closer to their labor. Archaeological evidence from plantation sites has found remnants of large cooking pots and serving areas at field edges, confirming this practice. Dietary records from plantations show remarkable consistency in what enslaved field workers were fed. The standard ration consisted of cornmeal, some form of pork fat or salt pork, and occasionally beans or rice. Fresh vegetables and fruits were rare. Meat other than preserved pork was almost non-existent. Nutritional analysis of these documented diets reveals severe caloric deficiencies. A typical daily ration provided approximately 3,000 to 3,500 calories. However, studies of the physical labor involved in cotton picking estimate energy expenditure between 5,000 and 6,000 calories per day during harvest season. This chronic caloric deficit had documented health consequences. Medical examinations of enslaved people conducted by plantation doctors and later by Union Army physicians during the Civil War consistently noted malnutrition indicators, low body weight, vitamin deficiencies, anemia, and general physical weakness despite the muscular development from heavy labor. The food itself was prepared with minimal variety. Cornmeal was typically made into hoe cakes, flat breads cooked on shovels or flat surfaces over open fires. The name hoe cake is historical fact, documented in numerous period sources. Water access during these breaks was limited. Many plantations had no nearby water source in the fields. Workers would drink from buckets brought out, often sharing common dippers. This practice is documented in historical accounts and contributed to the rapid spread of diseases. The break itself was spent sitting or lying on the ground. There were no benches, no shade structures, no accommodations for rest beyond simply stopping work temporarily. During this time, plantation records indicate that overseers often inspected the morning's picked cotton, checking weight and quality. Some plantations weighed cotton at midday, others waited until day's end. But the quota system was always present, always measuring, always judging whether someone would be punished later. Medical research on human physiology shows that 30 to 40 minutes of rest after 5 to 6 hours of extreme physical labor in high heat is grossly insufficient for recovery. The body needs significantly more time to restore energy, rehydrate properly, and repair muscle damage. But plantations weren't designed around human needs. They were designed around profit maximization, and 30 minutes was what the profit margin allowed. Historical accounts from formerly enslaved people describe this break as simultaneously a relief and a source of dread. Relief because the physical labor stopped temporarily. Dread because it ended so quickly, and the hardest part of the day still lay ahead. When the horn sounded again, workers would return to the exact same labor they'd been doing all morning. Except now their bodies were already exhausted, the heat was at its peak, and many hours remained before the workday ended. Afternoon temperatures in the Mississippi Delta during late summer regularly exceeded 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Historical weather records confirm this. Combined with humidity levels typically between 70 to 80%, the heat index would reach 105 to 110 degrees. Modern occupational safety standards classify sustained work in these conditions as posing severe risk of heat-related illness. OSHA guidelines recommend frequent breaks, shade access, and unlimited water. Enslaved cotton pickers in 1850 had none of these protections. The physical toll of continuing heavy labor through peak heat is well documented in medical literature. Core body temperature rises. Sweat rates increase, leading to rapid dehydration. Muscle fatigue accelerates. Cognitive function begins to decline. Risk of collapse increases exponentially. Plantation records document instances of workers collapsing from heat and exhaustion. Some overseer journals note these events matter-of-factly as routine occurrences. The response varied. Sometimes the worker was allowed to rest briefly. Sometimes they were forced to continue working. Sometimes they were punished for the perceived weakness. The cotton sacks continued to fill. By early afternoon, workers who had started the day with quotas around 150 pounds would be dragging sacks weighing 80 to 100 pounds or more. The physical mechanics of this alone are staggering. Biomechanical analysis shows that dragging a 100-pound weight while bent over, while continuing to perform fine motor tasks with your hands, while walking continuously, creates a compound physical stress that would break down even highly conditioned athletes within hours. Yet enslaved cotton pickers did this not for hours, but for 10 to 12 hours daily. Not for a day, but for weeks during harvest season. Not for one season, but year after year for their entire working lives. The cumulative damage this caused to human bodies is documented in medical examinations from the post-Civil War period. Union Army doctors examining newly freed enslaved people consistently noted severe musculoskeletal damage, particularly to the spine, shoulders, and hands. Around mid-afternoon, workers who had picked their quota of 150 pounds would reach the weighing station. Plantation records show that cotton was weighed using large beam scales. Overseers recorded the weight and the worker's name in ledger books. These ledgers still exist in archives. They're chilling documents, pages and pages of names, dates, and weights. Human beings reduced to production data. Property evaluated by output. Meeting your quota didn't mean your day was finished. Most plantations expected workers to continue picking beyond quota if daylight remained. The reasoning was purely economic. Why waste productive hours? So after meeting quota, workers would take a new sack and return to the rows. This second picking wasn't for quota fulfillment. It was pure surplus extraction. Every pound beyond quota was profit the plantation owner gained at no additional cost. Some plantations offered small incentives for surplus production, a few pennies or a small amount of tobacco. But these were rare and inadequate. Most workers received nothing extra for exceeding their quota except the knowledge that they might avoid suspicion or punishment. The afternoon hours stretched on. Historical accounts describe time seeming to slow down. Each minute felt longer than the last. The heat became oppressive to the point of disorientation. The repetitive motion created a kind of physical autopilot, where the body continued working while the mind retreated elsewhere. Formerly enslaved people who left written accounts described this mental state. The need to dissociate from the physical reality of what was happening to preserve sanity. To find some internal space where the plantation couldn't reach, even while your body remained enslaved to its labor. This psychological survival mechanism is well documented in literature on extreme trauma and forced labor. The human mind finds ways to protect itself when the body cannot be protected. But protection was incomplete. The trauma remained. The physical damage remained. The exhaustion remained. And still, the cotton waited. Row after row after row. The workday typically ended when daylight failed, usually around 7 o'clock or 7:30 p.m. in late summer. This meant 12 to 14 hours of continuous labor with only a brief midday break. Final cotton weights were recorded. Plantation ledgers from the period show meticulous record-keeping. Each worker's daily production was noted, creating a data trail that plantation owners used to track productivity, identify underperformers, and justify punishments. These records also served financial purposes. Cotton production data determined plantation value, secured loans, and facilitated the sale of enslaved people. A worker who consistently picked 200 pounds daily was worth more on the slave market than one who picked 150. Human beings were literally valued by their production capacity. After weighing, workers walked back to the quarters. This walk, after 12 hours of brutal labor, is difficult for us to imagine today. Your body is depleted. Your muscles are screaming. Your feet are damaged. Your back can barely hold you upright. And you still have to walk half a mile or more. Arrival at the quarters didn't mean rest. Evening chores awaited. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence document that enslaved people were responsible for their own food preparation, water collection, firewood gathering, and clothing maintenance. Water had to be carried from wells or creeks, often hundreds of yards away. Firewood had to be collected from surrounding woods. Cooking fires had to be built. Food had to be prepared. All of this after a full day of field work. Plantation ration systems are well documented. Weekly or monthly, enslaved people received their food allotments: cornmeal, salt pork, occasionally molasses or beans. They were expected to prepare this themselves, on their own time, using their own labor. Clothing maintenance was also the individual's responsibility. Washing, repairing, all had to happen during evening hours. With no electricity, this meant working by firelight or in darkness. Medical care, when needed, was generally provided by other enslaved people who had learned healing practices, often from African traditional medicine passed down through generations. Plantation owners rarely paid for doctors to treat enslaved workers, except in cases of serious injury or illness that threatened their property investment. Archaeological excavations of slave quarters have found evidence of herbal remedies, crude bandaging materials, and impromptu medical tools. These findings confirm the historical accounts of enslaved communities developing their own healthcare systems out of necessity. Supper, when finally eaten, consisted of the same ingredients as dinner, but prepared differently. Cornmeal might be made into mush or porridge. Sweet potatoes might be roasted in the fire. The salt pork might be boiled. But variety was minimal. Malnutrition was constant. By 9 o'clock or 10 p.m., people began trying to sleep. Historical accounts describe this as incredibly difficult. The body was too exhausted, in too much pain, for sleep to come easily. Yet it had to come, because in just 6 or 7 hours, the horn would sound again. This wasn't an occasional hardship. This was every day during harvest season, which lasted 3 to 4 months. Outside of harvest season, the work continued but with different tasks: planting, chopping weeds, preparing soil, maintaining equipment. There was no day off except Sunday, and even Sunday often included required chores. Plantation records show that some owners allowed Sunday as a rest day. Others required half-day work. Some required full work on Sundays during peak harvest. The human body cannot sustain this level of labor indefinitely. Medical science confirms this. Chronic exhaustion, accumulated injuries, inadequate nutrition, insufficient rest, all of these compound over time, leading to premature aging and shortened lifespans. Studies of skeletal remains from slave cemeteries reveal this damage: premature arthritis, spinal degeneration, bone fractures that healed poorly, stress markers indicating chronic malnutrition. These are the physical records of what this labor did to human bodies. The night ended, and in a few short hours, it would all begin again. Let's examine what this daily routine meant over a lifetime. An enslaved cotton picker might start field work around age 8 to 10. If they survived to age 50, which many didn't, that represented 40 years of this labor. During harvest season, approximately 3 to 4 months annually, they would pick cotton daily. That's 90 to 120 days per year, 3,600 to 4,800 days over a working lifetime. At 150 to 200 pounds per day, that's approximately 540,000 to 960,000 pounds of cotton picked over a lifetime. Nearly 500,000 pounds minimum, some significantly more. The economic value of this labor is staggering. In 1850, raw cotton sold for approximately 10 to 12 cents per pound. That means a single enslaved cotton picker generated $54,000 to $115,000 in raw cotton value over their working lifetime. This doesn't include the profit from processing, transportation, or final textile sales. In today's dollars, adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $2 million to $4 million in value generated by one person's forced labor over their lifetime. They received $0 in compensation. They own nothing. They could accumulate no wealth. Their labor enriched plantation owners while leaving them with only trauma and physical damage. The health consequences of this system are documented extensively. Life expectancy for enslaved people was significantly lower than for white Americans. Studies of slave cemetery records show average life expectancy between 35 to 40 years for field workers. Infant mortality rates were extraordinarily high. Disease was rampant. The physical damage was universal. Medical examinations of formerly enslaved people after the Civil War revealed chronic conditions across nearly all examined. Back problems, joint damage, respiratory issues from cotton dust, parasitic infections from poor sanitation, vision problems from years of close handwork in poor lighting. Psychologically, the impact was equally devastating. Modern trauma research helps us understand what constant surveillance, the ever-present threat of violence, forced separation from family, and the denial of basic human autonomy does to the human psyche. Studies of populations that experienced similar conditions: concentration camp survivors, prisoners of war, victims of long-term domestic abuse, show consistent patterns: PTSD, depression, anxiety, dissociative symptoms. Enslaved people experienced these same traumas, compounded over decades. Yet they survived. They maintained their humanity despite a system designed to deny it. They formed communities, preserved cultural practices, developed resistance strategies, and held on to hope even when hope seemed impossible. This resilience wasn't superhuman strength. It was ordinary people finding extraordinary ways to endure the unendurable. Through family bonds, religious faith, cultural traditions, and sheer determination to survive. The historical record preserves thousands of first-hand accounts from formerly enslaved people. These narratives, collected in the decades after emancipation, provide invaluable documentation of what life was actually like. They speak of the physical pain, yes, but also of love, of friendship, of joy found in small moments, of songs sung in the fields that carried coded messages, of skills passed down secretly, of acts of resistance both large and small. These weren't just victims. They were whole, complex human beings who happened to be trapped in an inhumane system. They had dreams, relationships, talents, and aspirations. The fact that slavery denied these things doesn't mean they didn't exist. Understanding this complexity, the suffering and the humanity, the oppression and the resistance, the damage and the survival, is crucial to understanding American history accurately. Because this labor built the American economy. The cotton these workers picked fed the textile mills of the North and England. The wealth generated funded industrial expansion, infrastructure development, and financial systems. The comfortable modern world we live in has roots in this labor. That's not speculation. That's documented economic history. So that was one day. Tuesday, September 12, 1850. Just one day, picked randomly from thousands of identical days across the Cotton South. Approximately 1.8 million people live this reality. That's documented fact. Census records confirm it. Plantation ledgers prove it. First-hand accounts describe it. This wasn't an aberration. This wasn't a few cruel plantations. This was the system. This was normal. This was American cotton production in 1850. By 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, cotton represented 60% of all American exports. The United States produced 75% of the world's cotton. This made America the dominant force in global textile markets and a major world economy. All of it built on days like the one you just heard about. When the Civil War ended slavery in 1865, 4 million people were freed. 4 million people who had lived under this system. Many of them spent the rest of their lives dealing with the physical and psychological damage it inflicted. But they also built new lives. They reunited with family members. They learned to read and write in extraordinary numbers. They established schools, churches, businesses. They became citizens and voters. They claimed the freedom they'd always deserved. The generation freed from slavery achieved remarkable things despite having nothing. No wealth, no education, no resources. Just freedom and determination. Their descendants are here today. The trauma of slavery echoes through generations, but so does the resilience. When we talk about wealth gaps, about systemic inequalities, about why certain communities face certain challenges, we cannot understand any of it without understanding days like the one we just examined. This isn't about guilt. This is about historical accuracy, about understanding cause and effect, about recognizing that the present didn't emerge from nothing, it emerged from this past. The cotton industry that enslaved people built with their unpaid labor generated wealth that was passed down through white families for generations. That generational wealth gap exists today because of the economic system we just described. Understanding this isn't about blame, it's about truth. The people who picked cotton in 1850 deserve to be remembered accurately. Not as abstract figures in a history lesson, but as real people who endured real suffering and demonstrated real strength. They picked cotton from sunrise to sunset. They survived impossible conditions. They maintained their humanity against a system designed to deny it. That's the story. That's the history. And that's what we must remember. Thank you for watching. If you found this educational, please share it. Next video, we'll examine what happened when enslaved people tried to escape. The risks involved, the systems designed to catch them, and the incredible courage it required to run. These stories matter. These lives mattered. And the truth must be told.